The Velthari War Council had been deliberating for 6 rotations. 6 rotations of holographic star maps spinning lazily above the obsidian table. 6 rotations of probability matrices flicker in pale blue light. 6 rotations of calm, measured voices dissecting the geometry of conquest with the same detached precision that a botanist might use to catalog a dying plant. Commander Sarathol sat at the head of the table, her 4 luminescent eyes half-lidded in the particular way that indicated deep satisfaction. She was tall even for a Velthari, nearly 3 meters of bioluminescent silver skin stretched over a frame that moved like water finding its level. Graceful. Inevitable. Her kind had evolved in the deep oceans of Vel Prime, where pressure and darkness had made patience into a survival trait so fundamental it had eventually become philosophy. The Velthari did not rush. The Velthari did not panic. The Velthari planned. "Show me the signal range again," she said, and her voice carried the harmonic double tone that marked her rank, a lower frequency running beneath her words like a current beneath still water. The holographic display shifted. A star map bloomed across the chamber, 3-dimensional and precise, and at its center sat the target system, a modest yellow star with 7 planets, the third of which was a pale blue sphere wrapped in white cloud patterns. Unremarkable. Quiet. This was exactly the kind of world the Velthari had absorbed 17 times before during their slow, methodical expansion over the last 4 decades. "Communication blackout is holding," said Subcommander Dravath, a younger male whose bioluminescence still flickered with the slight instability of someone who had not yet learned to fully control his emotional light. "The signal dampeners we placed at the system's edge are functioning at 97% efficiency. Nothing goes in. Nothing comes out. Nothing the inhabitants possess can breach our dampeners," added Fleet Analyst Soris, her tentacle-like fingers dancing across a haptic interface. "We have reviewed their technology comprehensively. Their fastest communication travels at light speed, via what they call radio waves. Primitive. Endearing even. Our dampeners eat radio signals the way the deep vents of Vel Prime consume heat, completely and without remainder." Sarathol allowed herself a slow blink. "And their military capacity?" Soris pulled up a new display. Numbers cascaded. "They have a planetary defense network, orbital platforms, surface-based kinetic launchers, and a small fleet of what they call warships. The fleet numbers approximately 400 vessels, the largest of which carries enough firepower to, in their own words, crack a moon." She paused. "We have reviewed their combat doctrine. It is reactive, territorial, emotionally driven." "Emotionally driven," Sarathol repeated, tasting the phrase. "They make decisions based on what they feel is right," Soris said, and there was no contempt in her voice, only the mild curiosity of a scientist cataloging an unexpected variable. "Fear, anger, loyalty, grief. Their battle commanders have been documented making tactically suboptimal choices because of what they describe as gut instinct. Their soldiers have been known to charge certain death for the preservation of a single companion. It is," she searched for the word, "statistically bewildering." Dravath made a sound like soft bells, which Velthari interpreted as a suppressed laugh. "Their largest warship is named Unconquerable. They name their ships," Sarathol observed. "They name everything," Soris confirmed. "Their weapons, their vehicles, their weather patterns. Their cities are named after individuals who died centuries ago. They build monuments to the specific location where things ended badly." Pause. "I have been trying to understand the logic. I believe it is related to their relationship with impermanence." "Their relationship with impermanence," Sarathol said slowly, "is irrelevant to our campaign." "Of course, Commander." The star map rotated once more. At its center, the pale blue world rotated slowly, as patient as an argument awaiting resolution. "We move in 3 rotations," Sarathol said. "Full suppression protocol. Signal blackout maintained throughout. They will not be able to call for help. They will not be able to warn their colonies. They will face us alone, and they will understand, as every species eventually understands, that resistance to the Velthari continuance is not a tactical error. It is simply a misunderstanding of how the universe is organized." She stood, and the bioluminescent patterns across her skin shifted into the deep violet gold that her crew recognized as absolute certainty. "We are the tide," she said. "And the tide does not negotiate." But 3 levels below the War Council chamber, in a small communications hub that smelled of recycled coolant and dried nutrient paste, a young signals officer named Threshvin was staring at something that should not have existed. He had been running routine diagnostics on the dampener network, the kind of repetitive technical work assigned to junior officers, the kind that was supposed to confirm that everything was functioning exactly as designed and therefore produce a report of perfect, unremarkable zeros. Instead, his diagnostic was producing a number that was not zero. It was not even close to zero. Threshvin ran the diagnostics again. The number remained. He cross-referenced it against 3 separate sensor arrays. The number remained. He pressed his secondary eyes, the smaller pair above his primary set, close to the display and examined the data with the particular focus of someone who very badly wanted to be wrong. He was not wrong. Somewhere in the signal dampener network there was a gap. Not a large gap. Not a gap that any standard Velthari probe would have identified, because standard Velthari probes looked for signals they recognized: radio waves, tight beam laser pulses, and quantum entanglement pings. The gap was too small for any of those. It was, in fact, barely a gap at all, a microscopic frequency window that fell between the Velthari dampener's operational ranges the way a single drop of water might fall between 2 stones. Threshvin sat back in his chair and tried to decide whether this situation was worth reporting. The commander had said the blackout was complete. The commander believed the blackout was complete. The probability that anything meaningful had passed through a gap this small was essentially negligible. He looked at the number again. The number that was not zero. He thought about his career. He thought about the commander's satisfaction. He thought about the 17 worlds the Velthari had absorbed without incident and the smooth, inevitable logic of the continuance's expansion. Then he thought about something one of his instructors had said years ago during his first year at the Signal Academy on Vel Prime. An old female instructor, ancient even by Velthari standards, had spent 60 years studying the communications of other civilizations before the continuance absorbed them. The most dangerous message, she had said, is not the one you intercept. It is the one you did not know was sent. Threshvin opened a new report and began to type. What Threshvin had found was so small that it took the full resources of the fleet's communication analysis team 4 hours to even characterize it properly. Fleet analyst Soris was pulled from her pre-campaign preparation to lead the analysis. She arrived in the communications hub wearing the flickering amber of irritation, and it took her approximately 40 minutes of studying Threshvin's data before the amber shifted, gradually and reluctantly, into something closer to the pale white of genuine unease. This is not a standard communication protocol, she said, mostly to herself. No, Threshvin agreed from his corner of the room, where he had been sitting very still for several hours, trying to take up as little space as possible. This frequency range, Soris stopped. Pulled up a new comparative display. Ran 3 calculations. This frequency range does not appear in any of the communication profiles we collected during our observation period. I noticed that too. Soris turned to look at him. Her primary eyes were fully open, a sign of concentration so intense it had moved past professional into something more personal. You're saying they developed a new transmission method? I'm saying something passed through the gap, Threshvin said carefully. I cannot tell you what. I cannot tell you when, exactly. The gap has been present for approximately 6 of their planet's rotation cycles, and I have no way of knowing how many times it was used or whether it was used at all. The gap's existence doesn't prove transmission. It only proves possibility. But you reported it. Yes. Because my instructor told me that the most dangerous message is the one you don't know was sent. Soris was quiet for a long moment. The communication hub hummed around them, coolant cycling, processors working, the faint vibration of the fleet's engines at standby. Somewhere in the middle distance, a junior technician was running a calibration sequence on a sensor array, producing a rhythmic series of soft tones that filled the silence between Soris and Threshvin like punctuation. We have been dampening this system for 42 of their days, Soris said finally. If something passed through before the dampeners were fully calibrated, or if something was already in transmission when we activated them, Threshvin said. A signal already in motion, already partway through the void. The dampeners would have caught the origin and the destination ends. But the middle? The middle was already in transit. Soris pressed her tentacle fingers together. Like closing a door on something that is already half through it? Yes. Another long silence. What would they have sent? Soris asked. Not rhetorically, genuinely as a scientist asking a question. Threshvin had been thinking about this for 4 hours. I have been reviewing their communication history from our observation period. They are a species that maintains extensive contact between their colonies and their homeworld. Regular updates, resource reports, personnel transfers, cultural broadcasts. He paused. But also, and this is relevant, they maintain a specific emergency protocol. A standardized signal that functions across all their communication systems, regardless of the technology being used. They call it, he checked his notes. They call it an SOS. Soris went very still. It is, Threshvin continued, the oldest emergency signal in their communication history. It predates most of their current technology by over a century. It is, by design, transmissible on almost any frequency, in almost any medium, at almost any power level. It requires almost no bandwidth. It requires almost no power. It can be sent by someone with almost no equipment. He looked up from his notes. It was specifically designed to pass through interference. The pale white of Soris's bioluminescence was now shading into something the Velthari had no specific color word for, a frequency that fell between unease and the particular dread of realizing that a situation you thought you understood has just revealed an entirely different dimension. If it passed through our dampeners, she said slowly, where would it have gone? Threshvin pulled up a star map. Drew a line from the target system outward, following the most probable transmission vector given the gap's location in the dampener network. The line extended, passed through space, and terminated at a cluster of 5-star systems, approximately 12 light-years from their current position, that the continuance's expansion maps had flagged with a specific notation. Human colonial territories, contested zone, military presence confirmed. Soris stared at the map for a very long time. Then she went to report to Commander Sarathol. The commander's reaction was not what Soris expected. She had expected the violet gold of certainty to dim. She had expected the calm deliberation to crack even slightly. She had expected the commander, who had spent 6 rotations building a campaign of absolute precision, to feel the weight of this new variable. Instead, Sarathol studied the map with an expression of what appeared to be mild intellectual interest. 12 light-years, she said. Yes, Commander. Their fastest ships, we have documented them? Yes. Their maximum sustainable velocity, using their most advanced propulsion, is approximately 0.3 light speed. Sarathol did the calculation instantly. The Velthari were exceptional mathematicians, another gift of the deep ocean, where spatial reasoning in 3 dimensions had been essential for survival. 40 years, she said. If they left immediately? Yes. And our campaign concludes in 14 of their days at the outside. Sarathol turned away from the map. The violet gold returned to her skin, steady and unhurried. Then the SOS, if it was sent and if it was received, serves no tactical purpose. By the time any response could arrive, there will be nothing here to respond to. That is correct, Commander. Then we proceed. Soris hesitated at the chamber entrance. Something else? Sarathol asked. I have been thinking about the signal, Soris said. This raises questions about why they would send it, knowing their fastest ships could not respond in time. Knowing that help could not come. Hope, Sarathol said simply. This is a characteristic of emotionally driven species. They act on feeling rather than probability. They send signals they know are futile because not sending them feels, to them, like a form of surrender. Perhaps, Soris said. You disagree? I don't disagree. I simply find myself wondering whether we have fully characterized their communication technology. Whether there is something in their profile that we have not. Soris. The commander's voice was gentle, the way deep water is gentle, still and enormous and not particularly interested in the things that float on its surface. We have spent 3 years studying this species. We know their ships, their weapons, their tactics, and their psychology. We know them. Soris nodded once. Yes, Commander. She left the chamber. She did not stop thinking about the gap. 12 light-years away in the colonial administrative hub of New Carver Station, a structure that looked to outside observers like someone had taken a city, turned it sideways, and bolted it to a rotating asteroid. A communications officer named Specialist Maya Chen was having what she privately classified as the worst morning of her career. She was 26 years old, 3 years out of the United Earth Defense Force Communications Academy, and she had specifically requested this posting because New Carver was a quiet station. Administrative. Bureaucratic. The kind of place where nothing happened quickly enough to be alarming. The message that had arrived 22 minutes ago was threatening to revise that assessment comprehensively. Run it again, she said to the system, though she was aware that running it again was not going to change what she was seeing. The system ran it again. The result was the same. A compressed, fragmented, partially degraded signal that had arrived on a frequency so low bandwidth that New Carver's standard receivers had almost missed it entirely. Almost. New Carver Station, which helps manage communication between different inhabited systems, had special receivers designed to pick up weak signals like this one. These receivers were a holdover from the early days of space colonization when messages often got distorted over long distances, and you needed tools that could piece together a message from its simplest parts. The signal, once reconstructed, was simple. It was an SOS. Not just an SOS. The SOS protocol carried with it, in its compressed standard format, a location identifier, a timestamp, and a threat classification code, a series of numbers that corresponded to a standardized catalog of emergency types. The location identifier pointed to Earth. The threat classification code was 777. Maya Chin had been trained on threat classification codes. She knew all of them. She knew which ones meant natural disasters, which meant industrial accidents, which meant viral outbreaks, which meant civil conflicts. She had never personally encountered a 777, as it had not been used in the 40 years since the code was established. 777 meant unknown hostile force. Origin, non-terrestrial. Survival of homeworld uncertain. She picked up her direct line to the station commander. "Sir," she said when he answered, "I have a priority absolute for you." Station Commander Diego Reyes was 61 years old, gray-haired, broad-shouldered, and possessed of the particular calm that comes not from the absence of fear but from having been afraid so many times over so many decades that fear had become something more like background noise, present, informative, but not in charge. He read Maya's reconstructed signal twice. Then he read it a third time, not because he didn't understand it, but because he was the kind of person who made important decisions carefully and didn't apologize for it. "Time stamp on the signal origin?" he asked. 22 days ago, sir. The signal degraded significantly in transit. It probably passed through some kind of interference field before it cleared into open space. 22 days. Reyes set the report down. Looked out the viewport at the slow spin of the asteroid's surface. The stars beyond it were hard, fixed, and ancient. "You verified the signal authentication codes?" 3 times, sir. Authentication is confirmed. The signal originated from Earth Defense Network Station Orbital 7. It's genuine. Any follow-up signals? Nothing. This is the only transmission we've received. Given the interference signature on the signal, I believe whatever is causing the interference is still in place around the Earth system. This message may be the only signal that got through. Reyes was quiet for a long moment. Maya waited. "Pull up the deployment roster for the contested zone," he said finally. "All UEDF assets fall within the response range. I want to know what we have." Maya pulled up the roster. The silence that followed was heavy in the specific way of silences that precede decisions that cannot be undone. "Sir," Maya said carefully, "the assets in range, they're not configured for a major engagement. We have patrol frigates, a couple of destroyer-class vessels, the logistics convoy currently docked at." "I'm not looking at what's in range," Reyes said. "I'm looking at what's in range with a functioning FTL relay." Maya looked at the roster again. Understood what he was doing. "Nova Station," she said. "Captain Sable Okafor. She has a relay array and a direct line to—" "Get me Okafor," Reyes said. "Right now." "Inchin." "Sir?" "Good catch on the signal." "Excellent catch." In the next 40 minutes, 3 brief and intense conversations took place on 3 different stations in 3 different star systems, each conducted by people trained to move quickly when speed was essential. The third conversation was between Station Commander Reyes and a voice that most people in the UEDF never heard directly, a voice that belonged to an office that existed in documents as Fleet Coordination Command and in practice as the single point of authority over the largest assembled military force humanity had ever built. The voice on the other end of the relay was calm, unhurried. It asked 3 questions: location, threat code, and signal age. Reyes answered all 3. There was a pause of approximately 4 seconds. "Understood," said the voice. "Authorization confirmed. Implement Protocol Hearthstone." Reyes closed the channel. He sat in his office for a moment longer, just a moment, looking at the stars. Then he stood up because there was work to do. In the history of human civilization, certain things had been built not because anyone expected them to be used, but because the people doing the building had looked at the shape of the universe and decided that not building them was a form of recklessness they couldn't live with. The pyramids, the Great Wall, the nuclear deterrence networks of the 20th century. Protocol Hearthstone was that kind of thing. It had been developed 23 years before the Velthari fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system, in the immediate aftermath of humanity's first confirmed contact with another spacefaring civilization, a contact that had been peaceful, ultimately, but had made several very serious people in several very serious rooms realize that humanity had been walking through the galaxy with neither map nor weapon, operating on the optimistic assumption that other civilizations would be friendly. The optimistic assumption had been partially correct. The civilization they'd encountered had been friendly. But the head of UEDF strategic planning at the time, a woman named Admiral Constance Ye, who had a habit of asking the questions no one else wanted to ask, had stood up in a briefing room and said, "What if the next one isn't?" The room had been quiet. "What if," she had continued, "the next one jams our communications first? What do we do? How do we respond? How do we coordinate across 12 light-years of vacuum when someone has cut our radio lines?" More quiet. "Because if we can't answer that question," she had said, "then every colony we establish is a hostage we're giving to whoever shows up next." Protocol Hearthstone was Admiral Yes' answer to her own question. It was, at its core, a solution to a communication problem, and like all genuine solutions to communication problems, it was primarily about redundancy. The universe was large and interference was inevitable, so you didn't rely on one channel. You didn't rely on 5 channels. You created a communication system that was so widespread, complex, and integrated into every human-run location in space that no one could easily block communication with humanity, because Hearthstone didn't depend on just one frequency, medium, or technology. You used all of them. You used all of them. But the piece that mattered most, the piece that the Velthari had no way of knowing about, because it had been developed entirely in the classified corridors of UEDF Strategic Command, was what happened after an SOS reached a Hearthstone relay point. The SOS didn't just alert nearby stations. The SOS triggered an automated cascade. Every relay point that received the Hearthstone-encoded signal immediately retransmitted it, on all available frequencies, to every other relay point within range. Those relay points retransmitted to their neighbors. And so on, spreading outward through the network like light spreading from a stone dropped into still water. In theory, an SOS transmitted via Hearthstone protocol could reach every human installation in explored space within a few days, regardless of the distance involved, because each relay point cut the distance to the next, and the cascade traveled at light speed through a pre-existing web of relay infrastructure that blanketed human space. In practice, this had never been tested. It was about to be tested for the first time. And here was the other thing the Velthari did not know, the thing that made Hearthstone not just a communication protocol but a doctrine. Admiral Ye had understood, when she built Hearthstone, that communication was only half the problem. The other half was a response. She had known, because she was the kind of person who read history carefully, that civilizations tended to maintain their military assets in clusters, concentrated around high-value systems, because concentration of force was a basic principle of military strategy. And she had known that this tendency, this completely logical, entirely defensible tendency, meant that in any given situation, the military assets closest to a crisis were almost never the most powerful ones available. So she had built a second layer into Hearthstone. Not just a communication cascade. A requisition cascade. When a Hearthstone SOS reached a relay point, it didn't just alert. It transmitted a standardized request package to every UEDF commander in the network. Current location, current readiness, and current travel capacity. And it tagged, automatically, every commander within viable response distance. Not response distance defined by the speed of their ships, but response distance defined by the specific FTL capacity that humanity had been quietly and methodically developing for the last 18 years, ever since a materials scientist named Dr. James Osei had figured out, essentially by accident, that certain configurations of exotic matter could be used to fold the topology of local spacetime in ways that reduced effective travel distance by a factor of several hundred. They called it a fold drive. The Velthari, in their 3 years of observing humanity, had documented human ships with maximum sustainable velocities of approximately 0.3 light speed. They had documented those ships because those ships were the ones that human civilization used for everything: cargo transport, passenger transit, patrol operations, and colonial supply runs. Those ships were everywhere. Those ships were visible. The fold-capable fleet was not visible. The fold-capable fleet was not used for cargo transport or passenger transit or patrol operations. The fold-capable fleet had exactly one purpose: to be wherever it needed to be, faster than any observer had reason to expect. It lived in deep space, far from colonies, stations, and inhabited systems, moving on long, slow patrol routes through the empty darkness between the stars, maintaining communication silence except for the automated Hearthstone relay checks that each ship performed every 6 hours. The Velthari had never seen them. The Velthari did not know they existed. Because Admiral Ye, 23 years ago in a briefing room on Earth Station Prime, looking at the stars through a viewport and thinking about the shape of the universe, had understood something that the Velthari continuance's carefully assembled intelligence profile of humanity had entirely missed. Humanity was not what it appeared to be. Not because they were hiding something exactly. More because they had spent their entire evolutionary history on a world that was trying very actively to kill them, and they had developed, as a consequence, a specific relationship with danger that no other spacefaring species the Velthari had ever encountered had developed. They planned for worst cases they hoped would never come. They prepared for eventualities they hoped would never arise. They kept the things they most feared losing hidden from sight because visible things could be targeted, and the things they most feared losing were each other. Back in the solar system, the Velthari campaign proceeded with the precision of a mathematical proof. The fleet emerged from deep transit on day 1, 47 vessels of varying class, arranged in the particular formation that Sarathol favored for contested approach scenarios. It was a formation that suggested both overwhelming strength and careful deliberation, the way a master playing a board game might arrange pieces to show that every response had been anticipated. Human orbital sensors detected them within minutes. The response from Earth Defense Network was immediate. All orbital platforms to active status, all available fleet vessels recalled from patrol routes and ordered to defensive formation around the planet, and all surface-based launchers brought online. It was, by any objective measure, an impressive response. It was also, by the same objective measure, insufficient. The Velthari fleet outmassed the combined Earth defense in every relevant category: raw tonnage, weapons yield, shield capacity, and redundant systems. The engagement probability models in Sores's analysis matrices were giving humanity approximately a 14% survival chance in a direct confrontation, and that 14% depended on the humans choosing their moment correctly, pressing every tactical advantage they had, and encountering some meaningful equipment failure on the Velthari side. Sarathol reviewed the models and set them aside. She did not need models to tell her what she already knew. "Open a communication channel," she said. Dravath looked up. "Commander?" "We always offer terms first," she said. "Offering terms is not a weakness. It is efficiency. We have absorbed 6 species with terms alone and absorbed 11 more with terms followed by demonstration and then terms again. The goal is incorporation, not destruction. The humans have qualities we find fascinating. Their labor, their creativity, their peculiar resilience, all of it has value to the continuance." She settled back into her command posture. "Open the channel." The channel opened. Commander Sarathol, speaking across the void to a species she had studied for 3 years, delivered the offer that the continuance had made 17 times before, in 17 different star systems, to 17 different civilizations that had each, in their own way, eventually understood she was right. "You are not being destroyed," she said. "You are being elevated. The Velthari continuance offers you a place within the largest and most stable civilization in this region of the galaxy. Lay down your weapons. Open your systems. Accept incorporation. Your culture will be preserved in the archives. Your people will continue. Choose survival." The response from Earth came after a pause of approximately 4 minutes. It was not what Sarathol expected. It was not a military response. No weapons fire, no tactical maneuvering. It was a single human voice, and that voice was calm. "We've heard your offer," said the voice. "We're going to need some time to consider it." Sarathol found this mildly intriguing. In her experience, species tended to respond to the continuance's offer with either immediate acceptance or immediate defiance. This measured, almost bureaucratic reply was unusual. "How much time?" she asked. 14 days, said the voice. Sarathol studied the number. 14 days. In 14 days the continuance's campaign would have concluded regardless of the human response. In 14 days the outcome was predetermined. She decided to be generous. 10 days, she said. "We will hold our position. You will hold yours. At the end of 10 days you will give us your answer." Another pause. "Agreed," said the voice. Sarathol closed the channel. Around her the bridge was quiet. "She agreed rapidly," Dravath said. "Desperate species agree quickly," Sores replied from her analysis station. But her light was flickering slightly, that amber uncertainty she hadn't been able to fully suppress since Threshvin's report. "It is a known pattern." "It is," Sarathol said. She was not thinking about the pattern. She was thinking about the pause before the human response. 4 minutes. Not the pause of someone consulting with panicked advisors or running to emergency briefings. It was more like the pause of someone who had been expecting the call and needed a moment to begin something specific. The pause of someone starting a clock. Sarathol filed the thought in the part of her mind she kept for variables that didn't yet have a home and returned to the campaign. What the human voice had actually been doing during that 4-minute pause. Transmitting, on 12 simultaneous Hearthstone relay frequencies, a single encoded message. Hearthstone active. Contact confirmed. Non-terrestrial hostile. Fold response requested. 10-day window. The fold-capable fleet did not have a base. This was deliberate. A fleet with a base has a location that can be found, mapped, monitored, and, if necessary, struck. A fleet without a base is simply part of the universe, moving through it at its own pace, going nowhere in particular, impossible to locate unless it wanted to be located. There were currently 212 fold-capable vessels in the UEDF Deep Patrol Fleet. The largest of them was called Designation 9 in official records and Caro by her crew, a name that had emerged organically over the 7 years she had been in service, meaning approximately nothing in any formal language but carrying, in the informal vocabulary of her crew, a sense of something like, the one that keeps going. The ship that wouldn't stop. The one you called when stopping was not an option. Caro was 1.8 kilometers long. Her fold drive could move her approximately 14 light-years in a single fold event, with a recharge time of 19 hours between folds. She was currently in a region of space that appeared on no map humanity had distributed to any external party, performing the slow patrol loop that she had been performing for 7 months, and her captain was in the middle of a meal in the officer's mess when the Hearthstone signal arrived. Captain Adiz Obi was 44 years old, originally from Lagos, currently of nowhere in particular, with close-cropped gray-streaked hair and the posture of someone who had long ago made peace with the fact that posture matters more than people think. She had been captain of Caro for 4 of the ship's 7 years. Before that, she had been first officer of Designation 3, which had been decommissioned after an accident that she did not discuss but that had left her with a slight tremor in her left hand that appeared only when she was exhausted and never affected her work. She was reading a novel, actual paper, which she preferred on the grounds that screens were fine for information and terrible for rest, when her communications officer, Lieutenant Sam Park, appeared in the mess doorway with an expression that managed to be simultaneously apologetic and electrified. "Ma'am," Sam said. "Hearthstone." Adiz set down her novel. "Earth?" she asked. "Earth," he confirmed. She stood. The tremor in her left hand, she noticed, was absent. Code 777. Signal age 28 days. Cascade confirmation from 14 relay points. The signal has been authenticated across the entire network. He paused. "It's real, ma'am." Adiz walked past him out of the mess toward the bridge. She did not run. Running was for people who had not yet decided what they were doing. She had decided. "Get me the deployment status on every fold-capable vessel in network range," she said, walking. "And get me a direct channel to fleet coordination." "Fleet coordination is already hailing us, ma'am." "Then I'll save them the wait." The conversation with fleet coordination was 19 minutes long. Afterward, Adiz stood at the forward viewport of Caro's bridge and looked at the stars. Her crew was quiet around her, not the quiet of inaction, but the quiet of people moving with purpose, running calculations, preparing systems, and doing the 10,000 small technical things that preceded the one large decisive thing. "How many are coming?" asked her first officer, Commander Taeyang Lim, standing beside her at the viewport. "Every fold-capable vessel in network range," Adiz said. 187 ships. Taeyang was quiet for a moment. "That's essentially the entire Deep Patrol fleet." "Yes. We've never assembled the full fleet." "No. So they'll be expecting?" He stopped. "They won't be expecting anything," he corrected himself. "They don't know about us." "Correct. How far are we from Earth?" 11.4 light-years. 1 fold event, plus adjustment. 19 hours to recharge after folding. "We won't arrive all at once," Adiz said. "Ships will fold in as they reach jump readiness. We'll have a staggered arrival over approximately 6 hours. I've been designated as the coordination point." She paused. "We'll arrive at Earth with approximately 160 vessels. Another 27 come in after." Taeyang did the math. "That's a significant force." "Yes. Against what we know about the Velthari fleet." "The numbers are competitive," Adiz said. "The Velthari have 47 vessels. We know their weapons profile from the preliminary intelligence Earth defense transmitted. We've run engagement models." She turned from the viewport. "We have a good fight." Taeyang looked at her. "You don't sound uncertain." "I'm not uncertain about the fight," she said. I'm uncertain about whether there needs to be one. She walked toward her command station. The Velthari offered terms. Earth's rep asked for 10 days. We arrive in roughly 30 hours. That provides us approximately 8.5 days before the deadline. Enough time for negotiation. Perhaps. She settled into the command chair. Or perhaps they'll see 160-fold capable warships emerge in their operational space and decide that their models need revisiting. She looked at her crew. All of them paused for a moment, in that particular stillness that comes just before a significant beginning, looking at their captain. Let's go home, she said. And Caro folded. Threshvin had not slept in 2 days. This was not unusual for him during campaign periods. His body ran better on short rest cycles than most Velthari, a quirk of his physiology that had made him good at communications work and bad at social functions, where other officers would be deep in their rest cycles by the time he was still alert and looking for something to occupy his mind. He had spent the 2 days running calculations he had no authorization to run on a personal pad he kept in his bunk rather than on the official fleet systems because he had a feeling, and Threshvin was suspicious of his feelings because feelings were not data, but this one was persistent in the way that good signals were persistent, that he was still missing something about the gap. The gap in the dampener network had been too small to matter. The gap through which something might have passed 22 days ago. He kept returning to the frequency window. The specific range fell within the operational parameters of the Velthari dampeners. He had initially assumed the frequency range was accidental, a limitation of the dampener technology, a microscopic oversight in the calibration. But the more he studied the human communication profiles, the more he noticed something that unsettled him. The humans had been using this frequency range for approximately 18 years. Not continuously. Not for regular communication. But across the historical record of their transmissions, there were isolated examples of signals in this exact frequency window. Always brief, always highly compressed, always seemingly unrelated to the main body of human communication traffic. And always, occurring within the period immediately following a military exercise. He pulled the records, mapped the timing. Cross-referenced with the exercise logs he had in the observation database. Every time humanity ran a large-scale coordinated military exercise, in the days following, there were these brief compressed signals in the dead zone frequency range. Like calibration checks. These signals served as a means of verifying the continued functionality of the network. It is like testing a system you need to trust with something important. Threshvin sat in his bunk with his pad on his knees and the cold feeling in his chest that he had learned, over the course of his career, to pay cautious attention to. He went to find Fleet Analyst Soris. Soris was in her analysis bay, running engagement probability models for the third time, and she looked up when Threshvin entered with the expression of someone who had not slept well either and whose bioluminescence was carrying more amber than she would have preferred. Threshvin showed her his pad without speaking. She read it. She read it again. She sat back in her chair. 18 years, she said. Yes. They've been using this frequency range for 18 years. Intermittently. But consistently in this specific context. Military exercises. Soris pressed her fingers together. So the frequency window is not a limitation they don't know about. It's a channel they've been deliberately maintaining. That's my interpretation. They've been calibrating a network that operates in the dead zone of our dampeners. Threshvin said, every dampener system developed in this region of space over the last 40 years. I cross-referenced with the communication suppression profiles of every continuance fleet that has operated in this sector. The frequency window appears consistently. Whatever they're transmitting in this range, it was designed to pass through interference that current technology produces. Soris was hushed. How long have you been looking at this? She asked. Since the first report. 2 days. You didn't bring this to the commander immediately. I didn't have enough data immediately. He paused. I have it now. Soris stood. Her bioluminescence was shifting through colors that Threshvin had never seen her display before. A rapid cycling that indicated something beyond unease, something that the Velthari called Velsorith. The moment when a calculation you have been trusting reveals an error so fundamental that everything built on it needs to be rebuilt from the foundation. We need to go to the commander, she said. Yes. They went. Commander Sarathol listened to Threshvin's report with her 4 eyes fully open. She did not interrupt. She did not display impatience. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time, long even by Velthari standards, which was saying something. Your conclusion, she said finally. The SOS that passed through our dampeners was not an accident, Threshvin said. The gap in our dampeners was not an accident. The humans have had a communications network operating in our dead zone frequency range for nearly 2 decades. That network almost certainly received the SOS. And given the compressed, highly efficient encoding of the signal, which I have now analyzed more carefully, it was not a simple distress call. What was it? Threshvin pulled up his reconstruction of the signal. It is my best interpretation given the encoding architecture, that the signal contained a location identifier, a threat classification, and a request for a specific type of response. He paused. I cannot tell you what response was requested. The encoded element of the signal is more complex than anything in our database. I don't have the key. But something was requested, Sarathol said. Yes. And that something, if it was received, is currently in the process of being provided. Threshvin said nothing because he could not confirm what he did not know, and he had a strong professional conviction that confirming things he did not know was precisely what had caused the situation to reach this point. Soris, Sarathol said. Commander. If the humans have a response capability that we did not document in our intelligence assessment, if there are assets we are not aware of, what would that look like? Soris thought about it. It would depend entirely on what we missed and why we missed it. If we missed it because it doesn't exist and they've improvised something in the 22 days since the signal was sent, it would likely be an amplification of known assets. More ships of the same type we've documented. That would not significantly change our engagement probability models. And if we missed it for a different reason? Soris met her commander's eyes. If we missed it because it was specifically designed to be missed, because they anticipated exactly this scenario and built a capability for exactly this contingency, hidden from observation in exactly the way something would be hidden if the builders understood that an advanced intelligence would be watching, then I cannot predict what it would look like because I don't have data on something I've never watched. Silence. How long until our monitoring sensors would detect an approaching fleet? Sarathol asked. At 0.3 light speed from the nearest human colony cluster? Approximately 12 years. And at speeds we have not documented? Soris looked at her. I don't have a number for that. Sarathol stood. Increase passive sensor range to maximum. Watch all approach vectors. Maintain the ceasefire. And, she paused and something shifted in her expression, something that the officers around her had never seen before. Not fear exactly but a close relative of it, the cousin of fear that lives in the space between certainty and its dissolution. Begin the full intelligence reanalysis. Everything we collected. Everything we assumed. Look for what we decided did not matter. Yes, Commander. She walked to the viewport. Outside the pale blue world turned. The first fold event registered on Velthari sensors at 0347 fleet time. A gravitational fluctuation approximately 200,000 kilometers from Cairo's designated emergence point, followed by the sudden presence of a ship that had not been there a moment before. Then another. Then 3 more within seconds of each other. The Velthari sensor array, which was calibrated for objects moving through space at velocities it understood, initially categorized the fold events as sensor anomalies. Objects did not simply appear in space. Objects moved through space, and moving objects had approach vectors and Doppler signatures and travel time. These objects contained none of those things. They were simply there. Threshvin was at his station when the first anomaly report came in. He stared at it for 1 second. Opened a direct channel to Fleet Analyst Soris. Said one word. Sensors. She was at his side in 40 seconds. The anomaly count by the time she arrived was 11. By the time she opened her analysis interface, it was 24. By the time she ran her first characterization query, it was 41. They're ships, she said. Unnecessary thing to say, she could see they were ships. But sometimes you needed to say the unnecessary thing before you could say the necessary one. How are they getting here? Threshvin asked. They're not moving here, Soris said, her certainty mirroring that of someone watching an assumption dissolve. They're arriving. There's no approach vector. No travel time. They're folding space. That technology doesn't. It didn't exist in our intelligence profile, she said. It exists now. The count reached 63. Threshvin picked up the commander's direct line. On the bridge to Cairo, Adiz watched her tactical display fill with the slowly growing symbol cluster that represented the assembling fleet. 63 ships so far. More arriving every few minutes. Around her, the bridge was quiet with purpose. Her crew doing their work, running their systems, and maintaining their stations with the particular discipline of people who understood that this moment had been a long time coming and intended to do it properly. She opened the fleet-wide channel. All vessels confirm operational status, she said. Hold current positions. Maintain formation. We are not here to initiate engagement. We are here to be seen. Acknowledgements came back from 63 ships. Then 67. Then 71. Taeyang stood beside her. They'll be tracking us on their sensors. Yes. How do you think they're taking it? Adiz looked at the tactical display. 47 Velthari ships, holding their position in the formation Sarathol had maintained throughout the ceasefire, disciplined and unmoving. On the other side, a growing cluster of fold-capable UEDF vessels is appearing from nowhere at the rate of several per minute. I think, she said, that they're running numbers. They were. Sarathol stood at the center of her bridge and watched the tactical display with an expression that her crew had never seen and could not fully read, because bioluminescence was not built to display the specific combination of calculation, reassessment, and the very precise emotion that occurs when an intelligent being who has spent their entire career trusting their models realizes that the models were looking at the wrong thing. The count was at 89. 92. 96. Their technology, she said quietly. We never documented fold drives. No, Sori said. We observed no ships with fold drives in our intelligence collection period. Because they kept them hidden? Yes. For exactly this contingency. Sori's was quiet. They anticipated us, Sarathol said. Not us specifically perhaps, but something like us. An advanced force with communication suppression capabilities. They built a response network specifically designed to operate in a communication blackout, and they hid the response fleet especially so it would not appear in any intelligence assessment. She watched a new fold event register, 104 vessels now. They knew that the first thing a sophisticated aggressor would do is study them. So they showed the sophisticated aggressor what they wanted it to see. The .3 lightspeed ships, Sori said. The 400-vessel defense fleet. The reactive, emotionally driven battle doctrine. Sarathol's bioluminescence was shifting very slowly, cycling through colors at a pace that suggested deep internal processing. All of it is real. All of it visible. And all of it, not all of it but enough of it, designed to be seen by someone looking for what they expected. 109. 114. The emotionally driven part, Threshvin said from his station across the bridge. He said it quietly, almost to himself, but the bridge was quiet enough that everyone heard it. Sarathol looked at him. We thought their emotional decision-making was a weakness, he said. The charging into certain death for a companion. The futile signals sent from a surrounding system. He paused. But an SOS from a dying world with no rational expectation of rescue, that's not irrational. It's the signal that activated a network that just put 114 warships in our operational space in less than 3 hours. The bridge was hushed. Ysymgj, Threshvin said, a phrase in the old Velthari dialect that had no direct translation but carried the meaning of something like, from this point I understand differently. 147 ships. The fold events had slowed to a trickle, one every few minutes now rather than the rapid cascade of the early hours. The fleet was nearly assembled. Caro sat at its center, and around her in every direction, the discipline of the formation held. Adiz had been awake for 21 hours. She did not feel it. This was a thing she had noticed about herself over the years, that at a certain level of focus, the body forgot to be tired. It was not sustainable. She knew it wasn't sustainable. But it was real and she was grateful for it. We're receiving a hail, Sam said. From the Velthari flagship? Yes, ma'am. Adiz straightened in her command chair. Took a breath. Put it through. The voice that came through was not what she expected. She had half expected the sonorous, confident tone of a species accustomed to being obeyed. Instead the voice was calm. Measured. Carrying within it, through the translation algorithms, a layered quality, a double tone, a lower frequency under the words, that the translation software rendered somewhat imperfectly but that conveyed, unmistakably, a quality of careful thought. This is Commander Sarathol of the Velthari Continuance, the voice said. I am speaking to the commander of the assembled fleet. Captain Adiz Obi, Adiz said. UEDF designation 9. You're speaking to the right person. Pause. You hid them, Sarathol said. Yes. The fold drives also. Yes. For how long? The fold drive program has been operational for 18 years. The deep patrol fleet has been active for 14 years. Another pause, longer this time. Adiz waited because she was the kind of person who understood that some silences needed to run their course. How did you know we were coming? Sarathol asked. We didn't know it would be you specifically, Adiz said. We knew it would be someone. Eventually. The galaxy is a large place and we've only been spacefaring for a few hundred years, but we've met enough of our neighbors to understand that not all of them are friendly. And we'd already encountered your expansion pattern. Absorbed species, suppressed communications, offers made after total strategic encirclement. She paused. Your continuance absorbed a civilization called the Thressi approximately 60 years ago. They had made contact with us before your arrival. We knew them. We knew what happened to them. Silence on the Velthari end. We built Hearthstone, Adiz continued, because we decided that if someone tried to do to us what happened to the Thressi, cut us off first, then demand surrender, we weren't going to let the cutoff work. The Thressi accepted incorporation, Sarathol said. They didn't have a choice, Adiz said. We made sure we would have one. The silence lasted for almost a minute. Adiz waited through it. You have 147 vessels, Sarathol said finally. We have 47. I have run the engagement models. So have I. A direct engagement would not favor us. No. But it would cost you significantly. Yes, Adiz said honestly. It would. A Velthari fleet fighting defensively with their backs to empty space. We've modeled that too. You take a meaningful percentage of my fleet with you. Meaningful ships. Meaningful people. She let the word people sit in the transmission for a moment. I'd rather not. As would I, Sarathol said. For different reasons perhaps than you might assume. Tell me your reasons, Adiz said. Another pause. The continuance doctrine holds that conflict is inefficiency. The goal of absorption is to preserve viable species and eliminate destructive chaos. We do not seek to kill. We seek to incorporate. The destruction of the human fleet and the subsequent incorporation of your species by force would be a pause. It would mean the loss of the qualities that made you worth studying in the first place. We're not interested in incorporation, Adiz said. I understand that now. Understand it fully. We will not agree to it. Not under any terms. Not as a compromise. We are not seeking a deal that gives you some portion of what you came here for. And yet you haven't fired, Sarathol said. Neither have you. A long silence. What do you want? Sarathol asked. And the way she said it, the harmonic double tone carrying something that the translation algorithm rendered as exhaustion and recalibration both at once, suggested that she was asking a genuine question. Not a tactical question. A real one. Adiz leaned forward slightly. I want you to leave, she said. I want you to go back to wherever the continuance assembles its councils and makes its plans, and I want you to report what happened here. I want the people who decide which civilizations to study and which to absorb to understand that humanity is not a subject for that calculus. She paused. And I want the Thressi. I want to know where they are and what condition they're in, and I want a process established for communication between them and us. They were our friends before you took them. I'd like that back. Silence. You are, Sarathol said slowly, a more complicated species than our models suggested. People usually are, Adiz said. Fleet analyst Sori spent the next 4 hours doing something she had never done before in her professional career. Systematically identifying every assumption in the humanity intelligence assessment and testing it against the new data. It was a deeply uncomfortable process. Not because the work was difficult. She was exceptional at her work and the methodology was straightforward. It was uncomfortable because of what she found. The assumptions were not wrong in the way intelligence assumptions usually went wrong, by over-relying on incomplete data or by failing to account for known variables. They were mistaken in a more fundamental way. They were mistaken because the frame was wrong. The continuance had built its understanding of humanity around a simple comparative model. Here is what a space-capable species at this stage of development typically looks like, and here is how humanity maps onto that template. The template included a military capacity, a communication infrastructure, a political structure, a set of observed behaviors and documented tendencies. Everything on humanity's surface matched the template well enough. Their visible fleet was the right size for a species their age. Their communication systems were the right sophistication level. Their political structure, though complicated and fractious, was entirely consistent with what one would expect from a species that hadn't unified for a long time. The issue with the template was its assumption that the surface represented the entire picture. For most species, the continuance had studied it. But humanity, Soris realized, had built their society around a distinction that the template didn't have a category for. The distinction between what you show and what you have. She pulled the historical human records, the full archive, not the excerpted profile she had been working from, and started reading. She read about military history. about arms races and deterrence theory and the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, that humanity had somehow survived despite the logic of it being collectively suicidal. About the long tradition of maintaining strategic reserves, kept secret, kept quiet, kept ready. She read about something they called operational security, a phrase that expanded the more she dug into it from a simple military concept into something more like a cultural philosophy. The understanding, built into the bones of human strategic thinking over centuries, that the information your opponent has about you is itself a weapon they hold, and you can shape that weapon by choosing what information to let them have. They had not hidden the Fold fleet by accident. They had not maintained communication blackout resistance because they happened to have the right technology. They had done all of this, all of it, every piece, because they had sat down at some point in the past and asked the question, what would a sophisticated aggressor do first? And having answered that question, they had built their response around it. Soris closed the archive and sat in the silence of her analysis bay for a while. Then she wrote a report. The report was addressed to Commander Sarathol, but it was really addressed to the Continuance Council, who would receive it when the fleet returned. It was titled, in the precise formal language of Velthari military analysis, something that translated approximately as, on the failure of template-based intelligence assessment when confronting a species that has anticipated your methodology. It was the most important report she had ever written. It began, we did not study humanity. We studied our idea of humanity and mistook the idea for the thing. Commander Sarathol read the report once. Then she set it down and looked out at the stars. In 17 previous campaigns, she had never received a report like this. In 17 previous campaigns, the intelligence had been correct, the models had held, and the outcome had been what the mathematics predicted. She tried to find in herself the feeling she expected to be there, the feeling of failure or humiliation, or the specific frustration of a carefully constructed plan encountering the world's refusal to cooperate. She found something different. She found curiosity. The Velthari were, at their core, a species that had evolved in the deep ocean, in a world of patience and pressure and the slow, inevitable logic of physical law. They had taken that evolutionary heritage and built a civilization from it, patient, precise, deliberate, and certain. And that certainty, she saw it now, sitting with Soris's report in her hands, was the thing that had blinded them. They had been certain about humanity. And humanity had known they would be. And humanity had built an entire strategic infrastructure around that certainty. HFY, she thought. At this point, I understand differently. She went to the communications bay to continue the conversation with Captain Obi. Fleet analyst Soris spent the next 4 hours doing something she had never done before in her professional career, systematically identifying every assumption in the humanity intelligence assessment and testing it against the new data. It was a deeply uncomfortable process. Not because the work was difficult. She was exceptional at her work and the methodology was straightforward. It was uncomfortable because of what she found. The assumptions were not wrong in the way intelligence assumptions usually went wrong, by over-relying on incomplete data or by failing to account for known variables. They were mistaken in a more fundamental way. They were mistaken because the frame was wrong. The Continuance had built its understanding of humanity around a simple comparative model. Here is what a space-capable species at this stage of development typically looks like, and here is how humanity maps onto that template. The template included a military capacity, a communication infrastructure, a political structure, a set of observed behaviors and documented tendencies. Everything on humanity's surface matched the template well enough. Their visible fleet was the right size for a species their age. Their communication systems were the right sophistication level. Their political structure, though complicated and fractious, was entirely consistent with what one would expect from a species that hadn't unified for a long time. The issue with the template was its assumption that the surface represented the entire picture. For most species, the Continuance had studied it. But humanity, Soris realized, had built their society around a distinction that the template didn't have a category for. The distinction between what you show and what you have. She pulled the historical human records, the full archive, not the excerpted profiles she had been working from, and started reading. She read about military history. About arms races and deterrence theory and the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, that humanity had somehow survived despite the logic of it being collectively suicidal. About the long tradition of maintaining strategic reserves, kept secret, kept quiet, kept ready. She read about something they called operational security, a phrase that expanded the more she dug into it from a simple military concept into something more like a cultural philosophy. The understanding, built into the bones of human strategic thinking over centuries, That the information your opponent has about you is itself a weapon they hold, and you can shape that weapon by choosing what information to let them have. They had not hidden the Fold fleet by accident. They had not maintained communication blackout resistance because they happened to have the right technology. They had done all of this, all of it, every piece, because they had sat down at some point in the past and asked the question, what would a sophisticated aggressor do first? And having answered that question, they had built their response around it. Soris closed the archive and sat in the silence of her analysis bay for a while. Then she wrote a report. The report was addressed to Commander Sarathol, but it was really addressed to the Continuance Council, who would receive it when the fleet returned. It was titled, in the precise formal language of Velthari military analysis, something that translated approximately as, on the failure of template-based intelligence assessment when confronting a species that has anticipated your methodology. It was the most important report she had ever written. It began, we did not study humanity. We studied our idea of humanity and mistook the idea for the thing. Commander Sarathol read the report once. Then she set it down and looked out at the stars. In 17 previous campaigns, she had never received a report like this. In 17 previous campaigns, the intelligence had been correct, the models had held, and the outcome had been what the mathematics predicted. She tried to find in herself the feeling she expected to be there, the feeling of failure or humiliation, or the specific frustration of a carefully constructed plan encountering the world's refusal to cooperate. She found something different. She found curiosity. The Velthari were, at their core, a species that had evolved in the deep ocean, in a world of patience and pressure and the slow, inevitable logic of physical law. They had taken that evolutionary heritage and built a civilization from it, patient, precise, deliberate, and certain. And that certainty, she saw it now, sitting with Soris's report in her hands, was the thing that had blinded them. They had been certain about humanity. And humanity had known they would be. And humanity had built an entire strategic infrastructure around that certainty. HFY, she thought. At this point, I understand differently. She went to the communications bay to continue the conversation with Captain Obi. The negotiation took 6 days. Not because the essential points were complicated, they were not, but because negotiation between two species that have never negotiated before requires, before anything else, the slow and patient work of establishing a shared vocabulary. Not a linguistic vocabulary, the translation systems handled that, but a vocabulary of intention. Understanding the meaning of a concession is crucial. Of what silence means. This describes how a firm refusal sounds in two different cultures, where saying no means something slightly different in each case. Adiz and Sarathol spoke for approximately 12 hours of those 6 days, in conversations that moved from the formal to the careful to something that neither of them would have called friendly, exactly, but that carried within it the quality of two people who have stopped performing for each other and started talking. Sarathol, it turned out, had spent more time reading about the Thresi than any of her officers knew. The Thresi were a species that had been pacifist by philosophy rather than by timidity. They had not been unable to fight the Continuance but had chosen not to, on the grounds that a war would destroy what they most valued: their art, their knowledge, and their accumulated culture. The Continuance had incorporated them and, as promised, preserved all of it in the archives. Do they know? Adiz asked in one of the later conversations. The Thresi. Do they know what was preserved? They have access to the archives, Sarathol said. Do they choose to access them? Pause. Less frequently than we expected. Because preserved culture isn't the same as living culture, Adiz said. Archive material doesn't talk back. It doesn't change. It doesn't grow. It's a fossil, not a species. She paused. You can't preserve people by recording them. Another pause, longer than the ones before. Adiz had started to understand what Sarathol's pauses meant. This was the pause of genuine reconsideration. This is a thought that is held up to the light and examined from a new angle. We believed, Sarathol said, that the archive was a gift. I know, Adiz said. I believe that you believe that. And the preservation of the knowledge is real, and the Thresi are alive and not suffering. I'm not calling it nothing. She paused. I'm saying it wasn't enough. And I think you're starting to understand why. Because they lost the ability to make new things, Sarathol said slowly. Because they lost the ability to make new things on their terms, Adiz said. In response to their questions. In conversation with their history, which keeps changing because they keep changing. A culture that cannot respond to itself will stagnate. And a culture that can't grow is preserved, Sarathol said. The word had a meaning that Adiz understood well, but it also showed her a new side she hadn't seen before. Yes, Adiz said. The silence between them lasted almost 3 minutes. Then Sarathul said, the agreement on the Thresi. You asked for communication access and a process. Yes. I can provide communication access. The process will require council approval, which I cannot guarantee. Pause. But I will argue for it. Adiz looked at the tactical display where the assembled fleet maintained its patient formation, and at the 47 Velthari ships that had been in this system for 2 weeks now and had not fired a single weapon. That's enough, she said. The final agreement was not, by military standards, dramatic. No territory changed hands. No species surrendered. No weapons were destroyed or surrendered or formally catalogued. The Velthari fleet would withdraw from the solar system and its approaches. The UEDF Deep Patrol Fleet would stand down from full alert but maintain its operational posture. A communication protocol would be established between the continuance and humanity, formal, limited, but real. And Sarathul would carry to the Council, as a formal recommendation, the position that the continuance's expansion model required a fundamental reassessment before any further campaigns in this region of space. It was, in the vocabulary of diplomacy, a stalemate. In the vocabulary of everything else, it was something considerably more complicated. Threshvin wrote a personal log entry while seated in the communications hub on the final day before the Velthari fleet left. He did this rarely. He was not, by nature, a person who found the narration of his experience illuminating. He preferred data. He preferred signals. But he had been thinking about the gap. The gap in the damper network had been too small to matter. That had, in fact, mattered. He wrote, "We built our dampeners to block everything we knew about. We were thorough. We were careful. We were, by our standards, complete. The humans built a signal to pass through what we hadn't thought of yet. Not because they knew specifically what we would do, but because they knew that anything we built would have edges, boundaries, limits, that any suppression system would suppress what its builders knew to suppress and leave a gap where the unknown was. And they designed for the unknown. They sent their most important message on the frequency of things we hadn't imagined." He paused. "I keep thinking about what kind of species builds for the unknown. It requires a specific relationship with your own limits, an acceptance that you cannot anticipate everything, followed by the decision to act anyway. It requires the ability to construct a signal that may never be received, to send an SOS that might never arrive, to keep a fleet hidden in the dark for 14 years on the chance that someday you would need it. It requires a tolerance for uncertainty that we do not have, or did not have. HFY. He closed the log entry. Outside the viewport, the blue world turned. 6 months later, on a Wednesday afternoon in the northern hemisphere of Earth, a woman named Dr. Sarah Okonkwo sat in a park in Columbus, Ohio, ate lunch, and watched a dog run across a stretch of grass. She thought about nothing in particular. She was a xenolinguist. She had spent the last 3 months working on the translation protocols for the new Velthari human communication framework, and she was in the specific way of someone who has been doing deeply important work for a long time and has temporarily run out of the emotional energy that important work requires. She was taking a day off. Her communicator buzzed. She looked at it. The message was from her colleague, Dr. James Farber, who was handling the technical side of the communication relay setup. "First transmission received from Thresi Archive," it said. "Not a recording. Not preserved material. A new message. They wrote something new. Come look." She stared at the message. The dog was still running across the grass, turning now toward a child who had knelt down to greet it, arms wide. She thought about Adiz Obi, whom she had never met, standing on the bridge of a ship called Caro in the darkness between the stars, watching the ships arrive. She thought about an old admiral named Ye, sitting in a briefing room decades ago, asking the question no one else wanted to ask. She thought about a signals officer named Threshvin, staring at a number that was not 0, deciding it was worth reporting. She thought about cultures that grow and cultures that are preserved, and the difference between the two and what it costs to maintain them. She stood up, brushing grass from her jacket, and started walking back toward the research building. On Caro, which was back in deep patrol, moving slowly through the long dark on its regular loop through the unnamed stars, Adiz Obi was reading her novel. Paper. Real paper. She preferred it. Taeyang came to the doorway of the officer's mess. "You should be resting," she said without looking up. "I know. I can't sleep." He leaned against the doorframe. "Are you worried? About what entirely specifically? About whether it holds the agreement. It's unclear whether Sarathul has the ability to actually move the council." Adiz turned a page. "I don't know. Does that bother you?" She considered the question. No, she said. Not particularly. You're okay with not knowing? I'm functional in the presence of not knowing, she said. There's a difference. She turned another page. We did what we could do with what we had. We built something that worked when it was needed. We had a conversation that changed something. I believe it changed something, and I could be wrong, but I believe it. And now we go back to the slow work. She paused. The deep patrol. The maintenance. The training for the contingency we hope never comes. The building for the unknown, Taeyang said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. The Thressi sent a new message. Adiz looked up from her novel. Dr. Farber's team confirmed it. First original transmission from within the incorporated Thressi population. A message, not an archive retrieval. They said, he paused, consulting his communicator. They said, we heard there were people who remembered us. We wanted to say, we are still here. We would like to know what we've missed. Adiz sat with that for a moment. Outside the viewport, the stars were hard and fixed and ancient, and the void between them was not empty, it was full of things moving through it at speeds that various species were beginning to recognize they did not fully know, carrying signals on frequencies that various suppression systems were beginning to understand they did not entirely cover, and occasionally sending messages that fell through gaps that someone, somewhere, had decided were worth designing for. HFY, Adiz said. Taeyang looked at her. Threshvin sent it to me, she said. The phrase, when the negotiations concluded. He sent a message. She held up her communicator. Just those 3 words. What does it mean? From this point I understand differently, she said. She returned to her book. Caro moved through the dark. The Thressi waited for a reply. And on Earth, in a park in Columbus, Ohio, a dog ran across a stretch of grass and turned toward a child with arms wide, and the afternoon light was precisely the color of something beginning. Indeed.